These videos are presented by the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado through grant funding from the Colorado Brain Injury Program with monies from the Colorado Traumatic Brain Injury Trust Fund. We would like you to remember this series is directed toward a wide audience, from those who have suffered a mild concussion that may dissipate quickly to those who have suffered a moderate to severe injury. Please remember that each case is different. Some symptomology may disappear quickly. For others, the effects of the injury may be more long-term.
Hello, and welcome back. Once again, thank you for taking the time to tune into our video series. In this segment, we're going to cover how to problem-solve challenging behavior and typical areas of impact following a brain injury. Trust me, those two things go hand in hand. Maybe your child's treatment team went over some of this with you while in the hospital or rehab, but maybe you were running on cafeteria coffee at that time and it didn't really stick. Or maybe your mind was more preoccupied with, but are we getting discharged? So we're going to dig into these two topic areas by first going over what I like to refer to as a recipe for problem solving. Sometimes when things are feeling so out of control or unpredictable, it can be grounding to have a process to follow. Then we'll hear from 3 different parents about their child's unique brain injury and the various challenges they faced. After each story, we'll break it down a bit so we can better understand what areas of impact might be at play and how we can problem solve our way through it, or at least do our best trying. So first, what's with this recipe idea? It's not uncommon to feel like you're having to get to know your kiddo all over again following a brain injury. And this could be the case for a mild brain injury all the way to a more severe injury. As you get reacquainted, it can get real overwhelming real fast with trying to sort out all the new behaviors, oftentimes behaviors that feel like a change in personality. So we're going to start with the notion that kids do well when they can. This is a basic tenet to a behavior support approach called collaborative problem solving. The author of Collaborative Problem Solving, Ross Greene, has also authored the books The Explosive Child and Lost at School, 2 excellent resources. Kids do well when they can because, as Ross Greene states, doing well is always preferable to not doing well. So, if kids do well when they can, then if they aren't doing well, something is standing in the way of their success. As we look at this idea through the lens of brain injury, then there are any number of obstacles that could be standing in the way. So the first step in the recipe is telling yourself, kids do well when they can. Literally. When you're up against a whirlwind of challenging behavior, I want you to tell yourself, kids do well when they can. Your next step in the recipe is to ask yourself, is this a can't or a won't? Now, what do I mean by that? Is it that your child simply, in this moment, can't behave in an expected way, or is it that she won't behave appropriately? The first option assumes then that something is interfering with her ability to behave how you'd expect. Maybe it's an impact from the brain injury. The second option assumes that all skills are intact and that she's making a choice to not behave appropriately. Can't versus won't. If your child is recovering from a brain injury, I can't stress enough how important it is to consider the can't half of the equation. Now, that's not to say that kids who have brain injuries don't also show age-appropriate limit testing. In fact, it can be quite refreshing when they do, a sign of healthy development. But a lot of the time, there may be a skill deficit or an element of the brain injury at play that's resulting in whatever undesirable behavior you're seeing. Which brings us back to that idea again. Kids do well when they can. Finally, when trying to understand your child's behavior following a brain injury, it's super important to remember that performance can be scattered or inconsistent. For example, your daughter perfectly executed the task of taking the trash out on Wednesday, so why on earth is she losing her mind over it on Friday? It's a new day, a new hour, a new minute. What was easy one minute just became hard the next. This reality can be extremely frustrating for the survivor and the caregiver. It can also make it hard to decipher that can't versus won't conundrum. With those 3 steps in mind, kids do well when they can, the can't versus won't, and expecting inconsistency, we'll now hear from some parents who have children with a brain injury. Following each story, I will do my best at walking you through what they shared and how our 3 steps will navigate the way to some possible solutions. One caveat before we begin. I'll tell you up front, there is no silver bullet that I can relay to you that will solve any and all behavioral woes. Behavior is complicated, and it gets downright messy when there's a brain injury. All you and I can do is our best. Now, let's hear from Ashley's mom about her experience.
When our daughter was in middle school, she suffered a brain injury. After she got home from the hospital, we started to notice that her mood could change in a second. She literally would be playing with friends one moment and then become really irritable the next. She would get angry or start crying and screaming. She even started throwing things, ripping items, slamming doors. Her frustration level was just very low, and she had little tolerance for small things people said or did. It's like she couldn't control her emotions. One day she just took off running down the street, and looking back now, I feel like maybe she was trying to escape from how she was feeling. People were telling us that her behaviors were normal for her age, but my instinct told us that her actions were much more extreme than the typical age-related kind of drama. We felt that these angry outbursts and tantrums and other behavior were so out of character that we even videotaped it once, just trying to make sense of her crazy behavior. In contrast to the outbursts, there were times when she would just shut down completely. This cold, blank look would come into her eyes. It was something I'd never seen before. It was as if she just wasn't there. She would withdraw from us, her family, her friends, all the activities that she enjoyed. We also felt sometimes like we were on a merry-go-round, trying to get her to do things around the house. We would ask her to do one simple chore, and she would start a task and then get easily distracted or not remember what we asked her to do, and even when she was reminded several times. Later, we realized that she wasn't being lazy or rebellious, but that her brain injury had affected her attention span, her ability to stay focused, and her memory. All these things, her irritability, her anger, her forgetfulness, the withdrawn behavior, they were outward signs of her ongoing internal and external struggles. Looking back now, I can see how her brain injury severely affected her mood and behavior. If I'd only known, we would have been better able to understand and help her navigate through the confusing struggles of her new life. If I were able to go back and give myself advice, I would say 2 things. First, get as much help as possible. They're great teachers, especially ones who made the effort to make use of the many resources available to educators who work with children who have brain injuries. These people have been and continue to be absolutely intrinsic to our daughters, our families' recovery process. Without the strong support and dedication from these educators, things would have been so much more difficult. And my daughter, she probably wouldn't be where she is today, at college. That leads me to my second piece of advice. Don't lose hope. Just remember, anything is possible.
Wow, there's nothing simple or easy about what she just shared with us. There are a few things that stood out to me, though, that I'd like to highlight. The unpredictability in Ashley's behavior and how her emotional control was all over the map. It also stood out to me that as parents, they realized her brain injury was at play in all of this. That is so fundamental because kids do well when they can. So what about Ashley's brain injury may have been causing these behaviors? Let's try to wrap our minds around the unpredictable behavior. There are many things that can be impacting why Ashley was, for example, fine with green beans on her plate one day and threw her plate off the table while screaming the next day. One area of impact following a brain injury that's very common are compromised executive functions. This fancy term of executive functioning describes a broad range of skills, one of which is simply referred to as emotional control. You see, your executive functions predominantly live right here and works like a piece in an orchestra with other parts of the brain. It's one of the final pieces to our brain's development, and when an injury occurs, we all too often see poor executive functioning at play. Fundamental to our emotional control is our skill of inhibition, or the idea that our brain is able to put the brakes on, that if we start down one path, realize it's not working or not right, then we can put the brakes on what we're doing and make a change. Our inhibition is seen when someone cuts us off on the road and we want to honk our horn crazily and scream choice words, but instead, we take a deep breath and sing along with the radio. There isn't a simple fix I can offer a person to help manage their child's emotional control, or lack of it. There are many variables that can be at play that help or worsen their inhibition and emotional control, like quality of sleep, time of day, hunger and thirst, even if the lighting around them is too soft or too bright. The list goes on. It can be helpful, though, to start a dialogue, if it's appropriate for your child, to be their watchdog of inhibition and self-awareness, if you will. So if you can start to sense an escalation or meltdown is building, then prior to eruption, you can offer words like, "I can see this is frustrating you. Why don't we take a break?" Or, "I see that you're upset. Maybe some time in the cool-out corner would be helpful so you can keep your body safe." Both statements lead with, "I see." You are observing to your kiddo what he may not be able to observe for himself. In a sense, being his own mind's eye. Above everything, though, remembering that kids do well when they can, and identifying what stumbling block might be in the way is critical. It automatically redirects you as the caregiver to a place of empathy and redirection, rather than a place of anger and consequences. Now, we'll hear from Jamie about her son's challenges.
The child I had before he was hit by a car was a very laid-back kid, very well behaved, rarely threw a tantrum, just got along with everyone, family and friends included. The kid after the accident was very emotional. He would become agitated, aggressive, just out of control at the drop of a hat, and it seemed most of the time it was for no reason. I couldn't figure out just what triggered him or set him off. I mean, his mood could change in a flash. One minute, he'd be playing with his brother, and the next, either breaking into tears or screaming. There was no rhyme or reason to it. Then his school situation just deteriorated. He was a pretty good student, A's and B's most of the time, and liked going there. After his accident, things were really hard for him. He couldn't seem to concentrate, didn't finish his work, forgot what he was supposed to do, and a lot of the time his teacher said he just sat at his desk with a sad look on his face or with his head down. He also got really angry about school because he knew he couldn't get it, and that was so hard for him to understand and deal with. For a long while there, it was a real battle to get him to even go to school. I finally found out that these kinds of behaviors are very typical of children who suffer a brain injury. Confusing as it might be, it's just part of the package for a time. Thank heavens I had a wonderful family support to get through that, and today my son is doing pretty well, so there is hope. Just don't give up.
What Jamie shared is so common. Not only did he struggle with similar emotional control difficulties like Ashley, but his mom also describes how challenging school became, especially in describing how he couldn't seem to concentrate, didn't finish his work, forgetting what he was working on, and just checking out in class. I previously mentioned how the term executive functions describes a wide range of abilities, one of which is what we call working memory. First, memory in general is commonly impacted following a brain injury. Short-term memory, long-term memory, and this funny thing we call working memory. Working memory is when our brain is trying to hold on to new information while doing something with it at the same time. So we're mentally working with that information. An example might be when you're reading something. Your brain has to hold on to all previously read words, make meaning out of them, and then continue to make meaning on top of that with incoming words on the page. Or following the steps to a math problem. You have to be able to solve simple computations while also remembering what the next step is in the larger problem. Or for Jamie's son, when given an assignment, he had to remember what the steps were to complete the task while doing the steps at the same time. He may have started something, but then quickly realized He didn't know what he was supposed to be doing. What makes this really hard on the kiddo is when he looks around and sees other students are busy working. Sometimes it's just easier to put your head down and check out. Since we're operating from the assumption that kids do well when they can, we start to think about the why behind his head being on his desk, bringing us to the can't versus won't. Is it that he just won't do the assignment because he doesn't like it? Or is it that he can't do it because he doesn't remember what he's supposed to do? I like to err on the side of can't. So what aids could be built in for him to help him remember what he needs to be working on? A simple teacher check-in during independent work time? Having the directions written out in a very linear first, next, finally format? There are even little buzzers that a student can hold on to that will randomly buzz to remind the kid to check on what he's working on, forcing him to self-monitor how he's doing. A final thought on school difficulties is to remember how important mental fatigue can be. Building in breaks during the school day or having a modified schedule to allow for rest can be the difference between a good day and an awful one. It can be the difference between your working memory and emotional control being online versus off. Finally, let's hear from Fran as she relays her experience with the long-lasting impact of her son's concussion.
Patricia has been explaining how the brain is impacted by an injury. And for some people, the injury is a concussion, which oftentimes clears within 3 to 6 months. For others who suffer multiple concussions or a more severe traumatic brain injury, things don't often get better in such a short period of time. At first, we were told that my son had acquired a concussion during wrestling practice, and the coaches immediately took him out, and we were sent to a concussion specialist. So many of us have gone through this protocol, but what happened next was what threw us into a spiral of aggravation and confusion. I want to talk about this because I wish I knew then what I know now. After his first and then second sports injury, a great many things occurred, with my son eventually having emergency brain surgery. The medical care was exceptional, and our son was going to come home. We truly felt blessed that we had won that battle, but the day-to-day struggles were just beginning. Now, 4 years later, we are still suffering from the repercussions of his injury. Somehow he got through high school, graduated, and even though we thought way back in our minds that things were just a little off, the school never really expressed any academic concerns, and no one he had constant contact with mentioned anything about his behavior or actions being a bit different. So we chose to ignore the cues as well. Why would we nitpick when we were just so fortunate to have our son with us? Well, we all went back to life as usual. He would graduate, head off to college, graduate school, and possibly marriage and children, you know, what we all plan from the first day we hold them in our arms. But what I overlooked was this. I got him up every morning. I sent him to school. I helped remind him of day-to-day schedules. I helped with his studies. I even helped him write those college applications. I was never a helicopter mom, but I guess it became one. Because I guess I also knew deep down that he couldn't do it on his own. Well, he did go to college this past fall and immediately found out that he absolutely couldn't handle the need for planning, organizing, being on time, running his life without those constant reminders he had relied on in the past. The inability to function took us all by surprise. And of course, as this unfolded, we started to ask the questions. Why didn't we see this? Why didn't we get help? Where could we have gone? What could we have done? And through this exploration, we're beginning to understand and accept that our parenting skills aren't the problem. The brain injury is. And I'm urging you to advocate for not only yourself, but your child. As soon as possible after an injury, find a brain injury group, a doctor, a therapist, someone that can provide the education and the insight and common sense ways to deal with what you might face. Ask questions. Find services and support as fast as you can. This is called advocating for your child. Be proactive, not reactive. You would do anything for this child. So start by accepting the possibilities of what might happen and keep a positive approach to what can be. We aren't out of the woods yet, but we are starting to see the light. Don't stop asking questions. don't give up. Not for either of you.
Fran's story is not as uncommon as you would think. Most people figure if it's just a concussion, then it's not that bad. After all, it's called mild TBI. Except that it being called a mild TBI has nothing to do with the potential reverberations felt for weeks, months, and sometimes years after. When we think about kids doing well when they can, Fran's story brings to light the importance of sorting out why a kid is doing well, not just why they're not doing well. In her son's case, they had done such an amazing job as parents to provide the support that led to his successful high school graduation. When he was off on his own, though, he wasn't able to build in those supports for himself. This happens a lot. His difficulties with planning and organization highlight two other executive functions that can be impacted following a brain injury. To plan and organize yourself to meet the demands of your environment can be exhausting. But fortunately, there are many tools that a person can shop around with to see what fits. Technology has brought on a wealth of options for daily planning, task planning, and providing reminders that didn't used to exist. For some, their smartphone has become their executive functioning powerhouse. For our 3 stories today, there is a theme of executive functioning and how it is so commonly impacted following a brain injury. It came up in all 3 cases for a reason. However, there are many other areas that are also impacted and could have also been at play for those 3 kids. Language, the words we speak and the words we listen to, can be impacted. Maybe for Jamie's son, he put his head on his desk because the directions simply didn't make sense. Visual spatial skills, or how we make sense of what we see in relation to the space around it. Maybe Jamie's son couldn't visually make sense of the words and pictures on the page, so he put his head down. For other families, the impact of the brain injury can be even more severe. There could be limitations in motor functioning now, providing frustration on everyone's end when having to provide a lot more physical assistance in tasks that used to be independent. Or receptive language, the words that we hear and make sense out of, is significantly impaired, making following a conversation so frustrating that your kid throws her glass of water at the wall just to make it all stop. There also tends to be a theme of just general muddled information processing, that sometimes the gears in the brain are just moving slower than the demands or input from the environment. This can also look worse if there's a lot of input competing for attention, like a noisy restaurant with a waiter who talks fast and a menu that's disorganized. All of those variables can impact how the brain injury survivor is going to function, and none of them are working in his favor. What's so important to walk away from this video with is knowing that kids do well when they can. There are numerous areas of impact that can follow a brain injury, and identifying how your child is impacted can make you an even better detective at how to support her unique needs. There is no silver bullet. There is no easy answer. But you can pause before reacting. You can have a go-to mantra like, kids do well when they can. You can mirror back what you see and continue to be a detective trying to figure out if his behavior is a can't or a won't. If it's a can't, then let's focus our intervention on what the skill deficit is and provide support, rather than a consequence that likely won't teach much. Because really, when we're looking at a behavior, we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. The real problem is below the surface, and it's our job to do our best at making sense of it.